Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the what if. XXX. The next morning XXX. After a night of wedding consummation, the two newlyweds slept on their shared bed. Thank Kami Tsunade's pregnancy was so close to beginning. So there wasn't going to be anything wrong from the baby, due to the long night of passion. And if I knew Naruto, he wouldn't want that to happen. Speaking of the silver-haired devil, his eyes cracked open as soon as the clock ticked 9. He groaned in frustration, feeling like he didn't get any sleep at all. I regret nothing. He thought, seeing his wife sprawled all over the very large bed. He regretted the war, because he was always waking up ready to fight. Fortunately, because of his beautiful wife, his body was too worn out for that to happen this time. I guess I should make a surprise breakfast for my Heim, the previous blonde said, stretching. He was about to leave when he remembered he was still naked as the day he was born. So after grabbing a pair of boxers he exited the room. He was halfway down the stairs when he thought of something, so he made a clone and sent it back up with its task already in its mind. He yawned, stepping into his kitchen, and got to work on personally preparing some breakfast. It wasn't anything hard, just some rice, scrambled eggs, bacon, and a glass of orange juice. By the time he was finished he felt the stirring of a single chakra signature. I wonder what time those three got in. Me and Suheim didn't even stay for the reception, he thought, chuckling, since he only got a few hours of sleep, but then again his time in the Anbu Corps was similar. That's something he won't ever miss. Just then Yahiko yawned, walking into the kitchen, partially in the outfit from the previous day. Hey Tu-san, I see you're finally out of your ROU breakfast, he said, completely forgetting to end the sentence. Hey to you too, Yakun. How was your night at the reception last night? The whiskered Jonin asked, making a plate for the young 8-year-old. Yahiko only paid attention to half of what Naruto said. Fortunately he got the meaning behind the words he did hear. Oh, spending the night with a bunch of people I don't know was great, he said with a hint of sarcasm but also a little truth. Naruto rolled his eyes at the child and resisted the urge to hit him with the spoon in his hand. What about Nagato? Did anybody see his Rinnegan? To that, Yahiko surprisingly shook his head. Really? Naruto asked, full of surprise, setting Yahiko's plate in front of him. The orange-haired child hummed, grabbing a pair of chopsticks. He nearly immediately dug in, but was stopped by a hit to his head by a wooden spoon. Ow, why'd you do that? He asked, rubbing his head. It's to teach you patience. Now how did Nagato avoid detection? Did you three leave early? Naruto said, leaning against the counter, waiting for the response. Yahiko rubbed his head for a few more seconds. Some old lady came and gave Nagato something to put in his eyes. After that his Rinnegan went away to show regular, blue eyes. Yahiko explained, permitting a nod from the adult that allowed him to start eating. Naruto sighed as he ran a hand through his hair. Of course Ba-chan had something planned. She is the best seal master I've ever seen, regardless of what I've done. Naruto thought as the other two of his adoptive children entered the kitchen. Good morning, children. How'd you sleep? Naruto asked with a smile as they sat at the table, still looking sleepy. Konan yawned with a cute little face before she rested her head on her arm. Still sleepy. She droned with another yawn. Nagato was more rested, but he was busy rubbing on of his eyes. Mito-san told me to wear these at all times and it will help me with controlling the chakra around my eyes. What she didn't tell me was that they'll itch, he said, switching to his left eye. Naruto smiled and fixed the others with their own plates. There's probably a simple explanation for that, he stated with a grin as they begun eating their food. At that a knock sounded at his door. Naruto smiled and walked to it and opened it to find his old team, without their uniforms. The first he seen was his short and previous lieutenant, Kat, real name Akari. She had no surname because she's an orphan. She never frowned and always smiled, always looking at the world with a sunny disposition. She has short black hair that barely touched her shoulders. Her eyes were light brown, nearly hazel like Tsunade's. She was wearing a white blouse that accentuated her large B cup, making them looking like small C's. For pants, she was wearing a pair of black shorts that were like biker shorts and only went down to the middle of her thigh. Over them she wore black skirt that were the same length as the shorts. A pair of mid-shin high boots and a pair of gloves. Around her head was the Konoha headband with the black cloth that completed the look. The second to catch his eye was his tall male member, Turtle, real name might show. Yes, this man was obviously related to Guy. But surprisingly Guy was already born. This man was Guy's uncle. His twin Cho was the father of Guy. He had black hair that was spiky, unlike his brother's which was straight. His eyes were and eyebrows resembled Guy's as they were bushy. Their family must really love fighting close, because they were all taijutsu experts. But unlike the Guy from the future, he didn't wear a crazy-looking, spandex, bodysuit. But he didn't have weights on his appendages. He wore a white, tight muscle shirt that showed the outlines of his muscles. His pants consisted of white and green camouflage design, like Mist Ninja wear. Around his arms and legs were the previously stated weights in plain view. It was an impromptu decision thought of out of haste, and now he doesn't care if people could see them. They serve as a form of intimidation when he fights now. A Konoha headband with a white cloth was tied around his waist. The last member of his old team was Rabbit, short female by the name of Kasuga Yuhi. Like her daughter to be, she was fierce woman driven by instincts and compassion. She's where Kurenai gets her red eyes from. Kasuga said that her eyes were the way they were because they descended from the Uchiha clan, but were unable to gain the Sharingan but retained the red color of the bloodline. This news finally answered the questions Naruto had always had whenever he looked at Kurenai, but never got the chance to ask. Kasuga's attire consisted of a plain red shirt with a black pants. Her hair was long, black, and wavy just like her future daughter. Her Konoha headband with plain blue cloth was tied around her forehead. Naruto smiled at his old team, as he haven't seen them in nearly a month. They didn't have any kind of smile on their face, not even Akari who always smiled. I'm guessing you three are angry about my spontaneous decision to resign from being your captain. Naruto more stated than questioned. Why Taicho? Why would you leave us like that? Akari said through watery eyes. The other two nodded. Yeah, how could you leave and promote her to be the new captain? Sho accused, pointing at Akari who, despite being promoted, barely celebrated. Kasuga nodded in annoyance. You know your leave affected the team when she's not jumping around giving everybody high fives, she said, glaring at the silver-haired Jonin. Naruto stood there with a fish-like mouth. He had tried to speak but they had cut him off. Are you going to say something or not? Akari said cutely, glaring at Naruto. I tried. You kept cutting me off. He said, half expecting them to cut that off as well. When it didn't happen, he continued. The Hokage didn't tell you the news, did he? He asked, receiving a negative response. Well, the reason why I left you was because Tsunade got pregnant. I have 3 children to both raise and train, and the war's over. The 3 must have been really shocked by the news because they were frozen in place. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX and met the three kids. Naturally Akari was the one they got along with the most as she was like a kid herself. They had talked about how the mission went. It was a slow infiltration. Because of all the chaos, security went up everywhere. The village leaders were trying to figure out how to choose a new leader, which took a couple of weeks. Because it was a minor village, there wasn't a lot of strong people that could be candidates. It turns out they postponed the decision for a later date, more concerned with returning stability to the village. Of course Naruto would have wanted for his old team to have stayed just a bit longer to figure out the new leader, but what could he do? Naruto looked at the lone clock sitting on the wall near the entrance of the kitchen and noticed it was nearing noon. Why hasn't Tsunade woken up? The whiskered Jonin thought, crossing his arms. So with that question in mind he dispelled his clone and learned some new knowledge. He was pleased to learn that the chore had been dealt with. Tsunade was clean, having been bathed by the clone and given a nightgown to wear. The sheets were changed from their previously dirty set to a clean set. And Tsunade was returned to the bed, where she has yet to awaken from. Wow, she's really out of it. I guess I could use this time to train the team, he thought. Okay you three, I want you to go change and meet me in the backyard for a little training session. XXXXXXXX. Naruto stood against a tree, looking at his three charges. He was pleased to see they had taken the time to change into some casual gray training clothes. He was glad he took them shopping for Tama without Tsunade. He himself had opted for the same attire. His eye passed by each with a calculating gaze as he mentally went over what they've learned. As far as he knew, they read about most of the basics and now needed to put their knowledge to the test. They have a month before Hiruzen tests them on the shinobi arts. He sighed as he remembered something. These kids ate Tsunade's breakfast. He thought, narrowing his eyes. So, are you just going to stand there looking at us? Or, are we actually going to do something? Yahiko's smart alecky question gained the Jonin's attention, making him flinch. Sorry, I was just wondering, he explained, lowering his head. Naruto's eyes lightened as he smiled and created a clone with a new objective, making Tsunade's breakfast, and waking her up so it didn't get cold. Okay you three, I'm going to resume the lesson about the Kawarimi. During the past week I've felt your chakra signatures fluctuate trying to practice this technique on your own. Tell me how it went, he said, crossing his arms. Conan smiled brightly as she started talking first. Well sensei, I was able to understand the technique a lot better than the other two. And though it took me a while, I was able to successfully complete the technique. She unknowingly, or knowingly, bragged about her completion of the technique. Naruto's lips rose in humor at the happiness rolling off of the small brunette. Really Conan, that's impressive. Would you care to demonstrate this accomplishment? He said as she focused her fingers in the ram seal, just like she learned in the hand seal scroll. It was taking longer than usual, so Naruto took this time to look over the boys on his team. Surprisingly, none of them were showing jealousy at being upstaged by their comrade. The only thing on their faces was pride as Conan was successfully manipulating the chakra she had to complete a technique. Speaking of Conan, Naruto felt a small flicker of chakra that signified the switch of the technique. In place of the small girl was a batch of scattered sakura petals. After they appeared, Naruto heard a faint crash from behind him and smiled. She did impressive work as she had to have grabbed each of the individual petals to accomplish the technique. All she had to do was work on the time and she'll be ready for anything. Good job Conan. And, way to go Conan, were said by both of the boys on the team as a smiling Conan emerged from behind them. The Jonin noticed she was rubbing her head. I'm guessing you hit a branch, he asked, crouching and slightly parting some of her hair. Yeah, when I appeared, I was upside down and landed on the floor, she said, cringing as Naruto located the bump. Aren't you glad you didn't pick leaves that were high up in the air? He asked, chuckling as his hand lit up in green light signifying his use of medical jutsu. Iryojutsu wasn't really his expertise, but you don't marry the absolute best doctor, nurse without learning how to heal minor injuries. Good thing it was a little bump. Tsunade still didn't trust him with big things like. Conan nodded, feeling the pain subside altogether. Thanks to San, she said, walking back to the group. She was welcomed back with congrats and hugs. Naruto looked on in amusement. He let her enjoy the feeling of praise for another minute before he cleared his throat. Yes, that was an excellent job Conan. Now what about you two? You want to give it a go or what? He said, smiling as it was healthy to have a little competition between teammates. Yahiko shot his arms in the air. You know I have to do better than Conan, he said, forming the ram sign. Nagato, being the more reserved of the three, nearly nodded. I guess I'll give it a shot, he said, joining Yahiko with forming a ram sign of his own. Naruto held up a hand, stopping them from performing the technique. Before you do this, let me give you a target to search for, he said, creating a pair of clones and sent them to gather two objects. I just sent my clones to gather something for each of you to substitute with. It'll be your job to search for that specific object and successfully switch with it. First one to find and successfully substitute with it will get to choose what the team learns next. Naruto explained. Naruto watched them nod in agreement with the term. They each were set to succeed and pick the next step in training. I can't wait to do this. Then we can get started on the transformation technique, Yahiko said, his voice filled with excitement. Transformation? Don't you mean the clone technique? It's way better than the transformation will ever be, Nagato said without a hint of bashfulness. The orange-haired 8-year-old let out a loud laugh. Clone? You mean something that will dispel with anything it touches? He questioned, showing obvious knowledge of the technique. It's better than your henge. A technique any competent ninja could see through. Nagato fired back with a vengeance. Naruto looked on with wide eyes at the two children going back and forth. Both of you are wrong. It's obvious the Kawarimi is the most effective of the three techniques. Conan joined the fray with a factual statement. Well, who asked you? Both of the boys yelled at the origami user. Conan recoiled, obviously not expecting such a reaction. She quickly hid behind Naruto as they watched the boys resume their argument. This is when Naruto's clones exited the house. Phew. Naruto sighed under his breath. Finally, what took you two so long? Whatever, just go to your spots. Naruto said, pointing at opposite sides of the backyard. All right, are you two ready? The Jonin asked, thankful that his voice settled the argument. Yes, sensei. They yelled in unison as they glared at each other. It was amazing how Nagato's ripple-patterned eyes didn't frighten the orange-haired youth at all. Naruto activated his Rinnegan, prompting the clones to do the same. He looked at the objects brought from the house with a smile on his face. That must have been the reason they were late. Okay. On the count of 3 I want you two to start gathering the chakra necessary to perform the technique. I have my Rinnegan activated to watch for cheating, he said, watching their nods. He looked at them concentrating without channeling chakra. He dropped into a crouch, to be leveled with Conan. Don't worry, I got your payback, he said, tussling her hair. Oniya 2-3, he said as the flaring of their chakra told them they started gathering. It didn't take long for them to control their chakra enough to perform the technique. Though unlike Conan, they failed to complete the technique. Because of their failure, they weren't able to switch their bodies, but they were able to bring the objects to them. Fortunately, for them, they were able to properly grab their specific targets. Said targets were balloons filled with water, courtesy of Naruto's clones. The water balloons collided with Nagato's and Yahiko's heads and busted into a shower of water. This surprised them immensely and they couldn't do anything except stand shocked as the water soaked them. The unsoaked individuals started laughing at the boys' misfortune. Don't worry you two, at least you got half of the technique. Conan boasted between laughter. The new adoptive boys shook their hair to rid their faces of the liquid, before glaring at Naruto. Oh, it's on, Yahiko said, running back to the house, no doubt going to collect an armful of water balloons. Nagato was only a few feet behind him. Naruto grinned, accepting the challenge. I'll make this a parody to a future exercise, hide and seek. Let's hide, Naruto told Conan before running through the semi-dense forest of cherry blossom trees he liked to call his backyard. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. It was half an hour later before the small water war ended. All four of them were thoroughly soaked, the kids more so than Naruto. It became apparent that Conan had switched to the boys' side halfway through when they found her and soaked her. She was given a chance for forgiveness if she helped them find Naruto. Naruto wasn't surprised as he and his team had done the same to Shinzu back before his training got super serious. They found him lounging in the trees. Their throws wasn't good enough to get him entirely, but the exploding water got him. Naruto used that opportunity to introduce them to an exercise they were going to learn sometime in the future, the tree walking exercise. Naturally they weren't able to do it, but in time they'll have it. They were his little geniuses after all. Naruto sat against his tree with his arms and legs crossed. So what did you three learn from this? The children were sitting as well, except they were in the sun, so they could dry faster. Nagato was the first to speak. I learned that teamwork is necessary against a stronger opponent. Naruto nodded. Correct, but think harder. What made it that you three were so capable in working together? Look underneath the underneath, he said, smiling at the nostalgia. Because we're best friends. We're able to work together so flawlessly because we trust each other. Yahiko said immediately. The others nodded with smiles on their faces. Naruto wiped a tear from his eye. You three are going to be the best team ever. It was at that moment that his clone dispelled. That meant that he successfully woke Suheim up and she was eating her breakfast. His smile grew and he stood to his feet. All right you three, continue working on the substitution technique. Conan, work on your speed. You two need to work on completion. If you're having any problems, don't be afraid to come to me for help. I'm out, he said as he did a few hand seals and watched as the water clinging to their bodies came off and formed a large blob in the air, which Naruto spread all over the trees. After that he quickly jogged to the house. He opened the door so quickly that a wind blew through the house. "Suhaime, you're finally up," Naruto said, running into the house to hug his wife. Tsunade was wearing a simple knee-high, light yellow, bathrobe. "I didn't think you'll ever wake up," he said, resting his head on her shoulder, while his arms wrapped around her breasts. Tsunade chuckled as she swallowed a mouthful of rice. "I did just return from Hevna. Why are you wet?" she asked, turning her head to look at him. Now it was Naruto's turn to chuckle. "Me and the kids had a little instructional water fight. They're out there working on mastering the Kawarimi right now. Konan's got it, she just needs to work on doing it instantaneously, as do the others," Naruto said before kissing Tsunade. The blonde sighed into the kiss before breaking it off. "You do know the chances of you having sex with me are going to decrease quickly," she stated, going back to her food. Naruto didn't unwrap his arms from her. Yes, I know, you told me that last night," the whiskered Jonin said, kissing Tsunade's chewing cheeks. Tsunade replied with a chuckle, "Did you know I barely made it downstairs? I'm still sore." The blonde felt her husband's chest puff out a little in pride. She shook her head and took another bite. "I need to go grocery shopping. We're running out of food," Tsunade said, thoroughly changing the subject. Naruto unwrapped his arms from around his wife, and cracked his back. "I'll just send a clone home." Tsunade shook her head. "This always happened. She'll say she had to go grocery shopping and he'll offer to send a clone. She'll soundly reply with, 'If you send your clones, all they'll get is instant ramen cups.'" Naruto would then grumble under his breath, "You act like that's a bad thing." But Suan would always hear him and threateningly clear her throat. That'll make Naruto gulp in fear and accept his defeat in the task. The argument was practically programmed in their mind by now. It was at that moment that Naruto's summoning seal for his wolves contract started glowing. A split second later, in a puff of smoke, a small 3-foot-tall wolf appeared. It had light gray fur and its canines were jutting from its mouth. "Naruto-sama, Mito-sama is requesting your assistance." Naruto had let Mito sign the wolf summoning contract a couple months after acquiring it. He wanted to have Tsukumo sign it as well, but he already had the dog contract. It being in his family for generations. Thinking of Tsukumo's family made him miss seeing his father. Sadly, he was killed in action, in the middle of the war, along with his mother. He had been real close to them and both of the boys suffered greatly, Tsukumo more for obvious reasons. It wasn't long after that the two started becoming famous for their accomplishments. They didn't know the meaning of rest, taking mission after mission, before Naruto joined the Anbu Corps for harder missions. Naruto shook his head, ridding the thoughts of his teenage years. He was just glad both Kai and Tsunade were there to calm the spirits of the two, respectively. "Thank you, I'll be there shortly," he said, touching a seal next to his summoning seal. Out popped a piece of beef jerky. "A token of thanks," he said as the unnamed wolf happily bit into the beef and dispelled with chomping still resonating through the area. "Well, seems like you have work to do," Suan said, pushing her empty plate away. "Maybe you should ask Jiraiya for help on this seal. After all, 3 heads are better than 2. He's definitely being a pervert somewhere in this village," she said with an annoyed shake of her head. Naruto chuckled at that. Speaking of Jiraiya, he admitted that he didn't even start his book and he's going to leave for a while. Nisan already agreed as he knew both the reasons he wanted to leave. That pervert's always training, trying to surpass Orochimaru. Even while training Naoki, Orochimaru was still powerful, and he only seemed to be getting stronger. Even being back in time, Naruto didn't know that much about Orochimaru. As long as he kept his jealousy in check, everything was going to be fine. Tsunade stood in front of her new husband and hugged him out of his thoughts. "I understand, now go. You have work to do. I want my grandmother to be alive for the birth of her future grandchildren." "Yes, of course, Suhaime. Feel free to teach the kids a few things in chakra control, you were always better than me at that," Naruto said, giving her a final kiss before heading up the stairs to change into dry clothes. XXX Few weeks later, August 1st, XXX. It was early in the morning and here he was, sitting in the Hokage's office, hearing news he heard not even a week ago. He was wearing a white skin-tight shirt and blue shorts and his blue sandals. He waited for a few minutes after his brother finished before he spoke. I understand that, but you know Nagato has yet to learn how to deactivate his Rinnegan. I don't want him to go into the academy with it activated the entire time, he said, scratching his chin, having a feeling he was going to have to shave again, as stubs of hair were slowly growing. Hiruzen nodded, getting an idea. I know what you mean, but can't you think of something to conceal his dujutsu from view? Like maybe a genjutsu? He asked, also stroking his trimmed beard. Naruto shook his head. It wouldn't work. It works on distance. The further away he is from me, the harder it would be to sustain the technique. I tried to give him simple shades to put on, but he didn't like having the accessory. Naruto informed, racking his brain for about the 100th time that week. This issue has entered Naruto's life the first time Hiruzen told him that his trio of children had to be entered into the academy for at least half of the school year before becoming real genins. But when they pass the evaluation in a couple of days they will get the title of special genins. That title meant they had the skills of a genin, but won't get a headband. Hiruzen reached for pipe on his desk, put some tobacco in, and lit it. Well, I don't know what to do about that. You're the Uzumaki. Did you try to think of a solution, via Fuinjutsu? He asked, blowing out a puff of smoke. Naruto's face went blank and he looked at his brother with a straight face. Let me guess, no. Hiruzen said with a sigh of embarrassment. Naruto closed his eyes to escape the embarrassed look from his brother. I've been so busy with Mito and the safest transference seal, that I haven't thought about it for Nagato's problem. He said with his eyes still closed. Perhaps I can give him regular glasses and fix it with seals, to conceal his Rinnegan. It'll simply show the eyes he had before the Rinnegan was activated. Oh wait, I don't know what color his eyes were. I'll ask him. He thought, opening his eyes and standing to his feet. Thank you, Ni-san. You gave me an idea. If you ever need help on your little project, you know where to find me. And tell Ne-chan I said hey. He said, leaving the office. Hiruzen chuckled at the empty space in his office. I guess I won't see him again for another week or so, he said as a cloud of smoke was blown out the corners of his mouth. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto ran through the village, his destination, home. Though he didn't want to see the sadness in the eyes of the former orphans, he needed to think in the comfort of his home. He really didn't know what the problem was. They already knew the necessary techniques and had basic knowledge needed to become genins. But he couldn't get mad at his brother for sticking with the rules. He would have done the same thing. When the morning crowd started filling the streets, he took to the rooftops. Now onto the subject of hiding Nagato's Rinnegan. Since he doesn't like shades for some reason, I'll have to incorporate seals into some contact lens. Kakashi really should have thought about that a long time ago, he thought, shaking his head, seeing his cherry blossom-covered house in the distance. Time to get to work, he thought, going straight for the open window to his room. He entered the room, only to be met with Suon's annoyed face. She was sitting on her side of the bed, her legs underneath the covers and her arms crossed over her shirt-covered chest. The Jonin chuckled nervously and sheepishly rubbed the back of his head. Good morning, Tsunade Haim. How are you this glorious morning? He asked, chuckling again. You know, I thought when you became a Jonin we would be able to spend some time together. But every time I wake up, you're nowhere to be found. I understand that you have things to do, but can I at least get breakfast in bed and a kiss? She said as tears pricked the corners of her eyes. Naruto chuckled in relief. Good, her hormones are just acting up and she's hungry, he thought before he crawled onto the bed and over his wife. I'm sorry, Haim. I've been real insensitive these past month, with training the kids and working on the transference seal. Next time I'll be here when you wake up with breakfast and a long kiss. Will you please forgive me? Throughout the whole thing he was pecking Tsunade's lips with his. The blonde shed the tears, but not in sadness. I'm sorry, Naruto-kun. I never should have doubted you for anything, she said, hugging him tightly. The whiskered man smiled into his wife's collarbone. It's okay, Haim. Now if you'll excuse me, I have things to do, she said, prying himself from her grasp. XXX unknown location. XXX. Thunderous clouds encircled high above the ground, repeating, striking the ground with bolts of lightning containing thousands, if not millions volts of power. Luckily there was no one around, so nobody was getting hurt by this angry act of nature. Nobody but the ground. But this storm does bring a question to the mind, just what is causing it? XXX August 5th XXX. Even though it was days ago, Naruto still walked around with a veil of loving pride over his face. The celebration of Tsunade's birthday was another all-nighter, and he couldn't help but be proud of himself. Of course it wasn't just the sex, he treated her to a 5-star dinner at the finest restaurant in the entire village. After the dinner, they walked through the park and watched the sun get replaced by the moon in a wondrous display of beauty. It was too bad all the whiskered Jonin was looking at was his wife. Then they had the after-party to end the night. Back to the present, the ex-Anbu captain was standing against the bark of an oak tree, watching his children take the evaluations he's been preparing them for. They were all ready, even Nagato, with his new contacts. They were powered with Fuinjutsu to work just like a normal pair of eyes. At the moment, Konan was being tested by some new Chunin sensei he didn't know. He wondered what happened to Ryoko sensei, he hasn't seen him in a while. Naruto wasn't surprised Konan passed the ninjutsu and genjutsu part of the evaluation. Now she was doing the taijutsu part. She was doing a pretty good job, considering she kept the usage of kawarimi up and running. Konan breathed a sign of relief when she evaded another punch with a substitution. She appeared in a flutter of leaves and threw a flurry of punches. A few hit, but most were blocked by the more experienced fighter. The man grinned at the girl and dropped to a crouch and swept her legs. She tripped, quickly landed on her hands, and just as quickly used all her strength to continue to flip herself back onto her feet. That maneuver made Naruto smirk as the Chunin was clearly surprised and the Hokage impressed. Konan worked on that for an hour or two, before she perfected it. Though regularly, she would have just dispersed in a shower of paper, but she was told to keep her bloodline under wraps, just like Nagato. Now the young redhead could leave the house without his hair hiding his new old blue-gray eyes. Clapping sounding through the open field. The sound coming from the Hokage. Most impressive. I expected nothing less from my niece, he said, patting his brother, Naruto, on the shoulder. You really know how to train him, but still leagues away from my students of course, he muttered softly to his little brother. Naruto scoffed at the arrogance of Hiruzen. Well, they're still 8. Give them a decade to grow in knowledge and skills. They'll give your team a run for their money, he said, watching the Chunin bow to Konan in respect, in which she returned it. We'll see, he said, clearing his throat to gain the attention of the participants. Excellent work. You've taught these students well, Tora-san, as did you, my san. Both of the male and female Chunins bowed, respectively. Thank you, Hokage-sama. They chimed in unison. Like every time the Hokage did an evaluation, the participating students stood in front of him. They stood in a single file, horizontal line. There was 5 in total, not counting the new Uzumakis. While Hiruzen talked to the 5 students, Naruto walked over to his trio of children. Don't worry, you 3, if it helps you feel better, then you should know that either one of you could defeat all 5 of them, at the same time, he said, patting the boys on their heads. Yahiko was the first to respond with a shake of his head. No, it doesn't make me feel better. I wanted a cool headband, he sulked with a droop of his shoulders. And I wanted to be an official ninja, Nagato added with a droop of his own shoulders. The boys waited a few seconds for Konan's own response, but it didn't happen. What about you, Konan? Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. She scratched the back of her head, in a totally Naruto-ish way. Well, Two-san's assurance made me feel better, so I don't have anything to say, she said with a slight, embarrassed, blush on her face. Naruto let out a slight chuckle. There's no need to be embarrassed, my dear. Say, how about I treat you 3 to ice cream for passing your exam, he said as instant smiles appeared on all 3 of their faces. They cheered in agreement and started running to the nearest ice cream shop. Naruto smiled widely as he watched the kids run out of the academy compound. Let's have them remain children for a little while longer, he thought, contently. XXX 1 week later XXX. Naruto and Orochimaru stood in the Hokage's office. It's great to see you 2 here, so shortly after being called. It's understandable, sensei. I was literally around the corner when the Anbu appeared, Orochimaru said, crossing his arms. Naruto scoffed. I was on the 5th of my morning laps, with 5 more to go. So I'm just waiting for you to tell me what you called me in here for, to gauge how I should yell at you. So if you can pick up the pace. Naruto said impatiently, tapping his foot, wearing a sweating pair of gray training attire. Hiruzen shook his head. His brother was always grumpy when someone interrupted his training. Just because I'm your brother, doesn't mean you can talk to me in a disrespectful way, Naruto, the older brother said, narrowing his eyes at the younger brother. Naruto returned the narrowed eyes, with his own. They scowled at each other, for what seemed like an hour, but was only a full minute. Fine, whatever, Ni-sama, Naruto said, glancing at the wall, as if it was the most interesting thing in the room. Hiruzen smirked and looked at his student, who was silently watching the exchange. Like I was saying, I need you two for an important mission in Kumogakure. Orochimaru rose his eyebrow in confusion. What's happening in Kumo that requires us to? He said, uncrossing his arms. Not 2, 4. I'm going with you, along with another who needs to get his mind off of things. He said, leaving it at that, and nobody questioned, though they wondered who it was. The Sandaime Raikage has agreed to an alliance with us. So you 3 are going to escort me to their village to talk business. It should only take a week or 2 to complete. Think of it as a semi-vacation, he said, smiling. Naruto chuckled. You expect Orochi here to relax and enjoy himself. You and I both know he's way too tense for something like this. Naruto chuckled through his words. Oh ha ha, Orochimaru said sarcastically. If sensei said this was a vacation, then I'm going to treat it as a vacation. Kami knows I need it, after what I've been through. Not to mention dealing with that nephew of yours, it's like dealing with another you. He quipped back at the former blonde. Naruto's grin split his cheeks. That's exactly what I mean, you can't handle fun. You lack the brain capacity to joke around. Well, sorry, I was always serious. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that we were at war. He yelled, showing some annoyance. So you're saying, now that we have a semblance of peace, you'll enjoy your life? Naruto said, smirking. Orochimaru released a large sigh of annoyance. Can we get back to the briefing? He asked, directing the question at his sensei. Now it was Hiruzen's turn to chuckle. That's pretty much it, we leave at noon from the East Gate. Take your remaining time to pack for the mission. That's when something came to Naruto's mind. Wait, who's going to act as Hokage, while you're gone? Hiruzen nodded at the question. I was just about to tell you. While I'm gone, Shinzu will take the temporary position. I needed somebody strong and resilient to corruption. Sensei's idea of a civilian council has been recently only thinking about themselves, instead of the entirety of the village. Naruto narrowed his eyes. Do you think it has something to do with Danzo? He asked, thinking about the aging war hawk. I'm not entirely sure, but I know something is going through his mind. The council may or may not be involved with his planning, Hiruzen said with a stern voice. Be careful, sensei. Danzo is smarter than we give him credit for. There's no telling what he's cooking up in that brain of his. Orochimaru joined in. The Sandaime nodded. That's true, he said, grabbing his pipe from his desk. Naruto watched him prepare his pipe with tobacco. Well, I have to go tell Su-chan the news. Hopefully she doesn't punch me through a wall, he said with a nervous chuckle before vanishing in a swarm of leaves. Orochimaru watched Naruto leave. I too have to tell Naoki, his training will be on hold, for now. Orochimaru said, leaving in the same fashion as Naruto. It was at Orochimaru's exit that one of the shadows in the office darkened. It then proceeded stretched to the front of Hiruzen's desk. When it got there, it rose off the floor and formed Shinzu's form. You heard what your student said, Shinzu. Before, careful while we're gone. Inform me if he tries to do anything, directly or indirectly. Also stay out of my sake. Sarutobi said, narrowing his eyes, forcing the Nara to chuckle and melt back into his shadow. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX household members understood the news that as a registered shinobi, he had to eventually get back into missions. Plus the fact that their training will be taken care of by Tsunade put him at ease. He sent a wolf to Mito, telling her that they'll transfer the Kyuubi out of her when he gets back. Finally the seal was finished and all they had to do was transfer it, which would take a while. He had a breakthrough when he stopped thinking Fuinjutsu specialist and started thinking like an Akatsuki member. They only took 3 days max to remove and seal a Biju's chakra into a giant statue. Though, instead of forcibly removing the chakra, it'll be easing the chakra out. My past will benefit this present, he said looking over his attire. He was dressed in a modified Jonin outfit. His black-clothed headband was tied around his forehead, holding back most of his bangs. Instead of the navy blue bodysuit, he wore black. He wore the dark green Jonin-style flak jacket with pride. His ankles was tapped down with black tape, so that it looked like that's how the pants part was designed. He didn't have any shuriken holsters, for the simple reasons that he could make his own, via different elemental techniques. He had a medical-style ninja pouch on the back of his person. Instead of sandals, he wore boots with metal plates on the soles. On his hands were simple gloves, with his clan's swirl engraved on the metal plates. All in all, he looked a lot like his father, with the blonde hair and the specialized cloak. Hopefully her hormone-induced mind doesn't hamper her teaching abilities. Naruto thought, checking the sun's position for the time. He had about 10 minutes before noon. He was a little nervous. He was going to meet the Sannin Raikage. During his original time, he learned all he could about the most famous and foreign cages, thanks to his father's journal. Cages like the Nadaime and Yondaime Mizukage, Hazuka-san and Yagura respectively. Yagura didn't have a lot of information in the journal, except that he was the only Jinchuriki to become a cage in the history of the elemental nations. The Nadaime Mizukage perished in battle along with Iwa's Nadaime Tsuchikage, Mu. Iwagakure had a single entry, which made sense as the Sandaime was already the cage and never stepped down. It was to Naruto's knowledge that the Sandaime just became the leader about half a year ago. He remembered reading that the Tsuchikage had the ability of flight and had a peculiar Kekai Tota, dust release. Minato didn't know a lot about Mu, because he was already dead. But Naruto knew a lot about the man, from personal experience. That was a fight that both parties had to flee, only to return a few months later and flee again. Naruto was so relieved to find that the man had died with the Nadaime Mizukage. He was a massive thorn in his side, an invisible thorn that he could barely detect. For Suna, he only had a single entry as well, the Sandaime cage. He was said to be the village's strongest cage, thanks to his ability to control iron. Naruto, himself, never had the pleasure to fight him, but Sakura did. If she and Chio could defeat him and Sasori, then he wasn't really all that. Lastly, the Raikages, and his father, the Yondaime and Sandaime Raikages, respectively. Both extremely powerful men, both users of nin taijutsu thanks to their lightning armors. Naruto himself modeled his own lightning ability after them, though he knew it was nowhere near as powerful as theirs. Maybe I should have stayed and trained with B for just a little while. Naruto thought as the east gate came into view. Hiruzen was already there, smoking his pipe, as well as somebody he didn't notice. The Hokage was wearing his cloak and hat, except his hat wasn't on his head, but tied around his neck, so that it was hanging behind his head. Under the cloak he was wearing his own Jonin attire, his was modified to look like Naruto's. The other person also unique in his own way. He was leaning against the gate with his head down. His long pale blue hair hung messily over his face, obscuring it from view, not unlike how Nagato's hair does. He was wearing the standard Jonin attire, which wasn't surprising, since this was a very high-class mission. Though Naruto noticed there wasn't any pockets on the flak jacket and it made it look kind of tacky. Naruto returned his attention to his brother and couldn't help but chuckle at the sight. There was a time when Naruto tried to smoke some of his tobacco, since he and Asuma were seen doing it countless times during his original time. That experience didn't end well. The Sarutobi clan was stingy with their tobacco. Why so early, Naruto? The silver-haired Jonin heard landing beside his brother. Well, I thought, the faster we get there and finish, the faster we can return. Naruto said, crossing his arms. Something's been bothering me though. Why are we trying to sign another alliance with Kumo? Didn't the last one fail because the Gold and Silver brothers attacked the Nadaime Raikage and severely injuring the Nadaime Hokage? Naruto asked, scratching his head, to see if he got the history right. The Hokage nodded. Yes, that attack cautioned Sensei to a great extent. But you have to see that now with the brothers dead, our two villages could try to resume what went wrong years ago. I bet if Ginkaku and Kinkaku fought with me and Sakumo, it would leave a permanent imprint on the world like Madara and Hashirama's battle did. Naruto said as he fantasized about the battle. Though it was hard, since he never seen them fighting before, thus didn't know how they fought. Where's Orochimaru? He should have been here by now. The Hokage nodded as that would have been an amazing battle to watch. He blew out a puff of smoke before he realized the subject of the two brothers were dropped. He's already here, little brother. He likes to do this before missions. He watches from a nearby perch, hanged as a simple snake, he said, puffing out another ball of smoke. I remember telling them that all living things had chakra. Orochimaru took that fact and studied his namesake. Hiruzen said, taking another puff. Naruto nodded as he remembered seeing Orochimaru in the library on multiple occasions studying everything the village had on all species of snakes. The white snake was the most rare. Naruto wondered if Orochimaru had already learned snake-style senjutsu. It wasn't like he could ask, or could he? He told me he was thinking about filling his team back up. So I'm thinking of putting 2 of the extra graduates with him. What do you think? The brown-haired Kage asked. Naruto shrugged his shoulders. It's really up to him, about what he should do. Honestly, I would love for him to teach Anko, but she's not even born yet. Not for another 2 to 3 years. Then it will take at least a decade before she's taken as an apprentice, if time didn't change by that much. Naruto thought. Well, I'm going to introduce myself to the other member of the team. Naruto said before walking over to the vaguely familiar man. Hey, I already know who you are. Uzumaki Naruto, one half of the twin silver wolves and the god of shinobi, he said, interrupting Naruto's self-introduction. Naruto chuckled sheepishly as he rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, I guess I am all those, but just Naruto would do. It's a shame, because I don't know who you are, he said, bending over, trying to find a glimpse of the face behind the veil of hair. It was at that moment that the man rose his head a little, showing part of his face. Naruto's eyes widened as a name entered his mind. Correction, I remember who you are. Dan Kato, Hoko no Phantomu, the walking phantom, long time no see. That put a small smile on Dan's face as he fully rose his head, revealing his dark green eyes. How's that adorable sister of yours? Dan's smile dropped a little. She's hanging in there, thanks to you. Though she's not waking up at all. I don't understand, it's been months since you saved her, she should be up by now, he said, lowering his head again. Naruto shrugged his shoulder, since he didn't know what was wrong with her either. It had happened a few weeks before he set out to help Tsunade and her team with Hanzo. It was like what happened with Naoki, only Mei was 23 and already had a daughter, Shizune, who was almost 2. Give her time, she'll wake up soon, she's strong. And plus she can't resist Shizune's adorable face for any time longer, he said, chuckling. Dan couldn't resist as he joined the small laughter. Orochimaru finally slithered out of his hiding spot. Took you long enough. What was you doing up there anyway? Naruto berated the snake user. Orochimaru ignored the comment. I'm ready to go, sensei, he said, also wearing the standard Jonin attire. Except, for him, the navy blue was replaced with dark gray. The forehead protector was also on his forehead, letting a long black bang from the right side of his face, while the rest of his black hair was tied in a low ponytail. He added a pair of dark blue, tomo-shaped, earrings along with a pair of black sandals. Hiruzen nodded and walked out of the gate, with his student not far behind. Naruto sighed. Oh, just go on and ignore me, he muttered before mildly glaring at Dan, who was snickering. His face softened its features before he smiled and they walked out the gate. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX freeze for the past 6 hours. The border to Kuni, hot springs country, should be another mile or so ahead. I don't know about you two, but I would love to relax in the soothing waters of one of their famous hot springs. Hiruzen said, sighing contentedly. Naruto and Dan shared a look. That said, is he serious? Before turning back to their commander-in-chief. Don't we have some sort of deadline to get to Kumogakure? Orochimaru asked from behind his sensei. The group was walking in a triangle formation. Orochimaru at front point, Dan at left point and Naruto at right point, with the Hokage in the middle. As an extra precaution, Naruto had a clone in the air, hanged as an ordinary hawk with the exception of the Rinnegan eyes. That's why Naruto's eyes were activated, connected vision. Hiruzen thought about it, the 15th, but that's 3 days away. Plenty of time to relax in another village's hot spring, he said, spreading his arms out in a stretch. Yeah, I guess, you need to relax those old bones, Naruto said jokingly as he let out a loud laugh. Hiruzen scoffed, oh please, I'm not even 40 yet. Plus I don't have a single gray hair, he said, turning his head a little to glare daggers at his brother. Naruto grinned widely, his faint whisker marks enhancing the smile somehow. I was just playing Ni-san, geez, you can't take a joke. Hiruzen also smiled. Gotcha, he said, laughing. I was playing with you too, Ototo, he said, looking straight ahead. Put your warrior faces on, people, we're coming up to the border, he ordered as everyone got serious. Orochimaru got out of the formation, so the Hokage could be in front as the leader. The group walked up to the border control of both Konoha Ninja and Hot Springs Ninja, 2 each. Halt, what business do you have in Yu no Kuni? One of the Yugakure shinobi said, holding out his arm at the Hokage. The Konoha border shinobi didn't like the way the man just stopped their leader like that. They were about to voice their opinions when the Hokage spoke. I have no business in this country, me and my party are just passing through to Kumogakure. Though, we would love to take a short break to use a hot spring, he added with a disarming smile. The 2 Yugakure shared a look before turning back to the Hokage. Your entrance is granted, Hokage-sama, of course you know everything was simply business. Feel free to use our most luxurious hot spring, reserved for only the most prestigious of guests. Just be sure to see the leader of the village before you use it, the taller of the 2 Yugakure Chunin said, stepping aside. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX We would like to have a temporary pass to use one of the onsens. Naruto told the young lady, who couldn't keep her eyes away from his. Meanwhile in the back, the rest of the party watched as Naruto was gazed upon by the young hormonal adult. I still think it should have been me that talked to the lady. Dan said, crossing his arms. I know what you mean, it's not even fair. Naruto's already married, he shouldn't be allowed to talk to any other women, except for Tsunade. Orochimaru complained, which was totally out of character. Though, he was still a man and still had those kinds of feelings. Hiruzen shook his head. I don't know what it is, but there's just something about Naruto's personality that lets anyone trust in him, especially the opposite sex. It was at that moment that Naruto came walking back, having heard their conversation. It's not my fault that the ladies like me. He smirked before walking to where he could change into the appropriate attire for the hot spring. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX towards Kumo. Naruto absently patted his stomach that was full of delicious dango and sushi. He made an oath that he wasn't going to have any ramen, unless it was made by either Ichiraku or his wife. Don't you think you put a dent in your savings, Naruto? You ate more than 50 sticks of dango. Hiruzen asked. I'm surprised you didn't destroy your body by now, with your wild eating habits. Orochimaru added his own 2 cents. Eat all you can now, Naruto, because you're not going to be eating a lot. With Tsunade being pregnant and all. Dan said, speaking from experience, since he had to help his brother-in-law with Mei, who ate way too much with her petite figure. It was too bad he died protecting Mei during the war, he was such a nice guy. Naruto ignored them, in favor of patting his stomach contently. We should pick up the pace. We'll stop at the last village in the country. I don't want to spend all night trekking through Shimo no Kuni, Frost Country. Naruto said, unzipping his flak jacket. Everyone nodded their heads. I agree, nobody wants to do that. Hiruzen said as that became the game plan as they broke out into a run into moonlit night. XXX the next day XXX. Yahiko woke up with a yawn and a small wince. Tsunade had them working on chakra exercises the entire day after Naruto left. It was intense, though he couldn't deny that he was getting extremely better at controlling his chakra. He looked around his room and wasn't surprised that Nagato wasn't in his bed. He was always waking up earlier than him and training to get stronger, so he could protect his friends. Speaking of training, let me get back to mine. I still need to perfect silent running. Yahiko thought, hopping out the bed to perform his morning routine. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX disappointed because she knew Naruto was still in the village, but the fact that he was on a mission made her uneasy. Who knows what's happening? He could have gotten captured and now he could be getting tortured, she thought as her mind played more scenarios with terrible outcomes. This went on for 5 minutes before she calmed herself down, by remembering just who her husband was. I have nothing to worry about. Naru-kun is the strongest person I know, and if he does get into trouble, he's not alone, she said with a smile. As she too got up to do her morning ritual. 10 minutes later she got dressed and went downstairs to cook breakfast for her children, while contentedly rubbing her stomach, loving the feeling that there was a tiny being inside of her that will eventually grace the world with its presence. For breakfast she was making a simple eggs and bacon with 2 pieces of toast. That was for the children. For her she was making a breakfast fit for a king, or queen in her case. It was both French toast and pancakes, with 2 pieces of sausage, bacon and ham, 4 eggs and lastly some hash browns. Kids, breakfast is ready, is what she meant to say, but only, kids, escaped her lips as they were already running down the stairs. In Nagato's case he was running through the back door, the smell of breakfast couldn't be ignored any further. The blonde mother smiled as all her kids yelled their thanks and began eating at a brisk pace. Maybe I should have gave them more food last night, she thought with a smile as she had only given them fruit to snack on between training. So what's on the agenda for today, Ka-chan? Conan asked while munching on a slice of toast. Well, I'm sure your father wants to teach you ninjutsu himself, since he would be the best qualified for that position. So, with that in mind, I'm going to go put more knowledge into those pretty brains of yours, she said, eating her own food, whilst making the boys' mouths water at all of her food, while looking down disappointedly at their small plate of food with tears in their eyes. What could that possibly be, Ka-chan? Nagato questioned as he finished eating. I want your 3 to pick a subject to focus on, between anatomy and psychology, she said with a smile before resuming eating. Yahiko, being the little devil he was, immediately knew which subject he wanted to focus on. I pick psychology, he yelled, slamming his hand on the table, making a small thudding sound. With that kind of knowledge I could know what my enemies were thinking before them, he said, grinning wildly. Nagato then spoke up, having a different choice. Well, with anatomy, we could know more things, physically, about our enemies. We'll have the knowledge of what body part is weakest with a simple glance. Then we could focus on that single body part, Nagato said, standing as well. The 2 boys glared at each other, making lightning appear between their eyes. Tsunade was surprised and looked at Conan for answers. Conan, being the calmest member of the group, understood the look. Chu-san already taught us the basics of both of those subjects. Since then, Nagato and Yahiko has been obsessed with anatomy and psychology, respectfully, the blue-haired girl explained, which made Tsunade frown a little. Well, what subject do you want to learn, Conan? Tsunade said, gathering the plates and putting them in the sink to wash later. The little girl smiled. Is explosives an option? She said, shocking the room, as that was the last thing they thought she would be interested in. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX She was currently in the study, searching through their many books on the subject. It wasn't a real auction, but they all wanted to learn different things, and Cammy as her witness she'll appease to her little dumplings. Thinking of dumplings were making her a little hungry, due to the pregnancy. Thoughts of food were stopped when she found a book marked, Explosives for Beginners, and another marked, Making Explosions with the Help of Fuinjutsu. She smiled as they were great books to start out with. Now all she needed was to find the books for the boys. Being a doctor, she had tons of books on the subject of anatomy, but she was conflicted about which one she should start with. For Yahiko, she had to really hunt, since she didn't know where Naruto put his books about psychology. She remembers when he took a few books from the T&I department, for obvious reasons. Why did I say psychology? Why couldn't it be poison or something simple? I have lots of books on poison. She berated herself in her mind. Maybe I should ask a Yamanaka. She thought, since that entire clan was all about the mind. The blonde was ready to rip her hair from her head in frustration. Where the hell are the books? She yelled. XXX with the Hokage and company XXX. The Hokage and his bodyguards left the last village in Kuni at dawn. They had a good night's sleep and already had a quick breakfast. They had already passed through the border into the land of frost, and the temperature instantly dropped 10 miles inside the country. Naruto noted that it wasn't as cold as snow country was, before it turned into spring country, but it was damn near close. I have a feeling somebody's mad at me, he thought as a chill went up his spine that had nothing to do with the climate. The party had already added a seal-operated, heat cloak, to keep them from getting frostbite. Something like that was common in the country, since none of the residents wanted to get frostbite, so all clothing had something like that. Naruto raised the collar to his cloak to shield everything but his eyes, from both the soft snow and the hard hail. He didn't have a clone in the air this time, since even with its enhanced sight, it would do nothing with this small, never-ending blizzard. Even with their speed, it still took 5 hours to traverse the entire country. It wasn't surprising that they didn't see any Shimo shinobi while moving through their country. Their village usually kept to themselves. The only thing they did was become allies with their neighboring countries, but that was obviously to refrain from being attacked by any of them. Hiruzen looked around to see if he could see his bodyguards. He was pleased that they were all right. He looked ahead to see a team of Kumo Jonins, no doubt to escort them to the village. Though one of them were shorter and looked to be wearing a Chunin flak jacket. Hokage-sama and party, we're pleased to see you enter Kaminari no Kuni ahead of schedule, the leader of the escort party said, stepping forward. He was a middle-aged man with short, crisp, brown hair. The nameless Jonin and the rest of his party, save one, had a more darkened skin tone than the Konoha party. The reason why was lost to them, but they really didn't care. Please follow us, while we lead you to our village. The Hokage nodded, pleased with how things were going. Absolutely. He simply said as they all started running towards the village. Though the party had already ran 5 hours, ceaselessly, they showed no signs of exhaustion. Oh yay, back to running. Naruto thought, rolling his eyes. XXX back in Konoha XXX. It took Tsunade an hour before she gave up on looking for the psychology books. Fortunately, she was interrupted from destroying the study in her anger by the sound of someone knocking on her front door. She heard voices downstairs before her name was called. She sighed, not wanting to deal with anybody at the moment. She brushed an exhausted hand through her hair and gathered the books she did find. It didn't take her long to get down the stairs, while carrying the small stack of books. Sorry, Yahiko, I couldn't find any psychology books, she spoke mournfully. Psychology books, I have some back at the house, a voice said to the blonde's left. Tsunade was surprised to see Tsukumo and Kai standing there. Especially Kai, her belly was getting bigger each time she seen it. From the looks of it, she only had a month to go before having the baby. With that thought in mind, she rubbed her own belly before registering just what was said. What, you have those books? She asked with hope. Yeah, we borrowed them from Naruto, Kai said, glaring at Tsukumo, who began innocently whistling. Somebody thought it'll be smart to read it to little Kakashi before bed. Okay, in my defense, if he comes out a prodigy, you can't be mad at me. Tsukumo quickly fired back. Ah, you already know what to call your future son. Tsunade cooed in admiration. It was surprising as she administered an ultrasound for the couple a couple of weeks ago. They were all happy to learn the baby was doing well. So those books, she said, getting back on target, thankful that they came to her house for a visit. She didn't even care what it was about. XXX somewhere near Kumo XXX. It took a total of 6 hours before the party reached the village. Now it was safe for them to show signs of exhaustion, after all they just ran 11 hours straight. That, and they had to trek up and through a mountain range. Now they were clearly on the same level of the clouds, and it was amazing, to put it simply. Naruto could see the entrance to Kumo in the distance and the large blue tower that signified the Raikage's workspace. Naruto looked to the youngest member of the escort group. "So how old are you?" he asked the young dark-skinned boy. He has shaggy white hair that covered his left eye, displaying his right eye, which had a sort of lazy look in it. His nose was noticeably a little bulbous, but it just seemed to fit his character. What captured Naruto's attention was the broad, cleaver-like sword on the child's back. It was easily as big as he was, and then some. "He'll grow into it," the silver-haired Uzumaki thought offhandedly. The kid looked at him slowly, further implying he was a little lazy. 10. He said, looking ahead again. Naruto rose an eyebrow at the blatant dullness. He heard Dan talking to another member of the group and turned his head to see. He noticed it was the only light-skinned Kumo shinobi in the group. Naruto returned his gaze back to the little kid, seeing if he could learn anything from him. He noticed the tattoo on the kid's left shoulder that said, "Lightning." Though Naruto noticed it was a lot darker than it should have been, but maybe it was just the way he was looking at it. Have I ever met the grown-up version of this kid? Naruto thought to himself before he shook his head of his thoughts. It picked the perfect time because up ahead was the Sannin Raikage. He was even bigger in person. He stood about at 6'11" with all of his body being like a bodybuilder. His eyes were stranger than expected. He had green color irises with dark sclera and absolutely no pupils. Whoa, and I thought the Hyuga had weird eyes. None of his pale blonde hair fell in his face, thanks to the bandana-style headband which displayed the Kumo insignia. His triangle-styled beard was fuller and more bushier than expected. He was wearing Kumo's single-shoulder strap-style flak jacket, with nothing else underneath. His cage cloak had no sleeves and he didn't wear the hat, because it was on his hip, like Naruto had his Anbu mask not too long ago. Naruto noticed the same kanji for lightning being on the cage's right shoulder, that perfectly matched the child's. So did he teach him or something? Naruto thought as he watched his brother approach the man, noting the size difference. "Welcome Hokage Dono and company, to Kumogakure. My name is Z and I'm pleased to see you here to discuss business." When Z spoke, his voice was gruff and commanding, yet had a hint of kindness. It wasn't strange, since all leaders are leaders because they all love their village and protect said village with their life. Likewise, Raikage Dono, Hiruzen said, shaking the man's hand. "I would like you to meet my son, he's next in line for the title of Raikage eventually," he said as a stepped up. "Hello everybody," said bowing, having a similar build to his father. His own pale blonde hair was slicked back and his own beard was trimmer than his father's. Unlike his father, he wore more than a flak jacket. A high-collar dark gray shirt was the only change though. "Hey, did you find your bee yet?" Naruto asked. The Konoha ninja turned to him, since it was a blatant show of disrespect. Though, truthfully, Naruto was being totally serious. Because he knew about Kumo's tradition for Raikages to have a partner for their AB team. "I'm sorry Raikage Dono, that's just my brother, Naruto," Hiruzen said, covering Naruto's mouth to prevent him from saying more disrespectful things. Instead of the Raikage answering a did. "Yeah, I did, he should be around here somewhere," he said, looking around, before a massive earthquake occurred, except this wasn't a regular quake. Because the quake was accompanied by a malicious aura that rocked everyone to their cores. Code Black. "Gather the team." Z barked out orders as they started running towards the escaped Hachibi. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX monstrosity that was the Hachibi no Ushi-Oni. The little child was scared out of his mind. One minute he was playing with his cousin, the next minute, his cousin loses control of his demon, causing it to escape. The Biju roared in glee as it was free once more to wreak havoc on the village. This time it was determined to cause as much damage as it could before he was eventually subdued. Not a minute later, a squad of 50 Jonin and 20 Bolt Anbu landed around the Hachibi. Among them was Z and his son, A. Do any of you find it weird that their Jinchuriki lost control right when we arrived at the village? Orochimaru asked as he and the others watched the Eight Tails fight the village's special force. It had already killed half of them before one of its tails were cut off. Now that you said that, I'm starting to get a weird feeling," Naruto said as the Hachibi roared in anger as it jumped back and began charging a Bijudama-tailed beast ball. "Shit, I need to stop that," he said as his Rinnegan activated. "Before careful Naruto," Hiruzen yelled as Naruto joined the fray. "We need to help Naruto to the best of our abilities. I don't want none of you dying, understood?" he ordered. "All right Hokage-sama, I'll try not to die," Dan joked as they too joined the fray. "This would have been the best time for the furball to be here to help me. This is his brother I'm about to receive a Bijudama from," Naruto said, getting in the path of where the beam of raw energy will travel. "Let's hope this works. Preta path. Fujutsu Kyuin. Preta path. Blocking technique absorption seal," he yelled as a transparent barrier glowed around Naruto, just when the Hachibi fired. "I swear if I die, I'm kicking somebody's ass," Naruto thought when the raw energy impacted. It was a war for dominance. Naruto looked as if he was going to quit, from the overabundance of energy entering his system, but he held out. The ground under Naruto exploded under him, nearly causing him to lose concentration. With nothing under him, he subconsciously used the gravity-controlling ability of the Rinnegan to keep him afloat. That, along with a platform of hard wind, was used to keep himself rooted in place. Damn, how much chakra did he use? Naruto muttered as he began glowing bright silver. Fuck, this chakra needs to go somewhere, or I'm going to explode, he thought in alarm. Fortunately for him the Bijudama ended, leaving the Hachibi in alarm. How? It yelled in confusion. Naruto thought about a technique he could quickly use to get rid of the excess chakra, but decided against it. With another technique in mind, he flew through 24 hand seals before extending his hands in a makeshift circle. A stream of lightning crackled to life around the Uzumaki's hands, growing bright white because of how much chakra it was made of. "Raiden! Reimei Todorokaho! Roaring Thunder Cannon!" he yelled, launching one of his strongest lightning techniques at the shocked Eight Tails. Unfortunately, the shock wore off in time for the Hachibi to dodge. Fortunately, he didn't dodge enough as the extremely large beam of electricity proceeded to cut through 5 of its remaining 7 tails. This time when the beast roared, it was in pain. The beam of lightning continued on its journey before impacting a large mountain, causing a very large explosion that could be felt from hundreds of miles away. Damn, I missed. Naruto cursed himself as he dropped to his knees to catch his breath. I'm so glad all the chakra used was from the Hachibi, otherwise I would be in serious trouble, he thought to himself while looking at the Hachibi. The Raikage and everyone else were astonished at what the Hokage's brother just did. Usually when the Hachibi starts using a Bijudama, they get the hell out of the way and hope it doesn't destroy the entire village. They've been fortunate that the Biju has only did that twice, this being the third. But still, when they seen Naruto survive and counterattack with an equally large technique, they were ready to cheer in victory. Of course they didn't when it missed the main target, but getting 5 tails was enough when you compare it to nothing. In that small pause in the battle, the third Raikage rushed the Hachibi with a large pot appearing over him. He slammed the pot down and formed a 20-hand seals in the span of a second. Fuinjutsu. Kohaku no Johei. Amber purifying pot, Z yelled as the Hachibi was soon sealed into the huge pot. Usually there's a ritual to follow when using the pot, but Z chose to ignore it and forcibly use it. Either way, the Hachibi was sealed and the village was saved. The village both mourned and cheered for the victory. Dozens of shinobi were killed protecting their village from a terrifying beast. I really do wish that was the Nekomata, Naruto muttered, noticing the others from Konoha were around him, patting him on the back. Oh, what an unfortunate turn of events, someone said loudly and mockingly. That voice nearly made Naruto's heart stop in pure shock. He turned his head slowly to gaze at the owner of the voice. Hello Naruto-kun, did you miss me? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.